She hurt you, and right now your mind wants one thing: to react. But if you respond from this emotional state, you might lose your dignity, your power, and possibly the outcome you secretly want. What you're about to hear could save you from saying something you'll regret and help you respond in a way that changes everything. When you are emotionally hurt, your nervous system goes into survival mode. Your mind starts racing, replaying words, moments, and imagined scenarios of what you should say or should have said. In this state, your emotions are loud and urgent, convincing you that immediate expression is necessary for relief. But what feels like strength in that moment is often just unprocessed pain demanding an outlet. When you respond while emotionally charged, you are not operating from self-respect or clarity. You are operating from a place of emotional injury. This is why reactions born from hurt often come out harsher, longer, and more revealing than intended, exposing vulnerabilities that should have been protected. Power in communication is not about volume, speed, or intensity. It is about control. The person who reacts instantly gives away information about their emotional state, their attachments, and their insecurities. An emotional response signals that the other person still has access to you, still has the ability to disturb your inner balance. This is not about ego or manipulation. It is about psychological positioning. The moment you let pain dictate your response, you surrender authority over the situation. Instead of steering the interaction, you become a passenger to your emotions, allowing them to drive the conversation into directions you may later regret. Emotional reactions also distort judgment. Hurt narrows perception, making everything feel personal, intentional, and irreversible. In that state, you are more likely to exaggerate, accuse, defend, or explain yourself unnecessarily. You may over-communicate in an attempt to be understood, not realizing that over-explanation often weakens your position rather than strengthening it. The more you try to justify your worth or your feelings while emotional, the more you imply that your value is up for negotiation. True power never begs to be recognized. It remains steady even when misunderstood. Another overlooked aspect is that emotional reactions reward harmful behavior. When someone hurts you and immediately receives a strong emotional response, it reinforces their sense of impact. Whether their intention was to provoke, test boundaries, or avoid accountability, your reaction confirms that they succeeded. This dynamic silently teaches people how to treat you. If every wound leads to emotional access, people learn that crossing your boundaries comes with emotional engagement rather than consequences. Over time, this erodes respect and normalizes emotional turbulence in your relationships. Restraint, on the other hand, interrupts this pattern. Choosing not to react emotionally does not mean suppressing feelings or denying pain. It means refusing to let pain speak on your behalf. It allows you to process internally before deciding what deserves expression. This space between feeling and responding is where power lives. In that pause, you regain authorship over your words, your tone, and your presence. You move from being emotionally exposed to emotionally grounded, from reactive to deliberate, from wounded to self-directed. People often confuse emotional intensity with authenticity, but authenticity does not require emotional chaos. You can be honest without being impulsive. You can express boundaries without aggression. When you delay your response until emotions settle, your words become fewer but heavier, quieter but clearer. This is why calm responses carry more weight. They signal self-control, emotional intelligence, and inner security. Emotional reactions may feel relieving in the moment, but they often cost you leverage, clarity, and self-respect long after the conversation ends. The pause between being hurt and choosing how to respond is not empty time. It is a powerful psychological reset. When something painful happens, the body reacts first. Heart rate increases, muscles tense, thoughts scatter, and the brain shifts into an emotional state where logic takes a back seat. In this moment, responding immediately feels urgent, almost necessary, as if silence would mean weakness or acceptance. But urgency is often an illusion created by emotion. The pause is what allows you to step out of this automatic reaction and reclaim authorship over your behavior instead of letting the situation control you. Pausing does not mean avoiding the issue or suppressing your feelings. It means recognizing that emotions are information, not instructions. Hurt wants to be expressed instantly, but expression without clarity often turns into damage. When you pause, you give your nervous system time to settle and your mind time to organize. You begin to separate what actually happened from how it made you feel. This distinction is critical because most conflicts escalate not because of the event itself, but because of emotionally charged interpretations layered on top of it. The pause strips away exaggeration and reveals what truly matters. Time also exposes intention. In the heat of the moment, everything feels deliberate and personal. A pause allows you to reassess whether the hurt was caused by malice, misunderstanding, emotional immaturity, or simple misalignment. Responding too quickly locks you into assumptions that may not be accurate. Once words are spoken, they cannot be retrieved, and explanations afterward often sound like damage control rather than strength. The pause protects you from committing to a narrative you may later realize was incomplete or wrong. There is also a quiet confidence embedded in not responding immediately. People often expect instant reactions because they equate speed with importance. When you pause, you signal that your emotional world is not easily hijacked. You show that access to you requires intention, not impulse. This does not make you distant. It makes you discerning. The ability to wait before responding communicates emotional maturity and self-respect without needing to announce it. It subtly shifts the balance of the interaction in your favor. Pausing gives you choice. Instead of asking, how do I respond? You begin asking, do I even need to respond? Sometimes the most powerful response is clarity. Sometimes it is a boundary, and sometimes it is disengagement. Without a pause, these options are invisible. You default to reaction because reaction is the fastest available behavior. With a pause, you expand your range of responses and select the one that aligns with your values rather than your emotions. When you allow time before responding, your words change in quality. They become shorter, calmer, and more intentional. You stop over-explaining and start speaking with precision. The need to defend yourself fades because you are no longer speaking from a wounded place. Instead, you are responding from self-awareness and emotional stability. This is how respect is built quietly, not through confrontation or emotional intensity, but through measured presence and deliberate restraint. Silence is often misunderstood as avoidance, weakness, or emotional withdrawal. But in reality, silence can be one of the most deliberate and controlled responses available. When someone hurts you, the instinct is to speak, explain, confront, or demand clarity. Words feel like the only tool to reclaim balance. However, silence disrupts this instinctive cycle. It removes immediate emotional fuel from the situation and forces space where tension once lived. In that space, dynamics shift. Silence is not empty. It is active restraint, a decision not to react impulsively or emotionally. Silence becomes strategic when it is chosen consciously rather than used as a defense mechanism. It is not about punishment or manipulation, but about refusing to participate in emotional chaos. When you do not respond right away, you deny the other person the emotional reaction they may expect or rely on. This can be unsettling, especially for someone who is accustomed to provoking responses, gaining reassurance, or controlling narratives through emotional engagement. Silence interrupts patterns. It breaks the rhythm of conflict and creates uncertainty where emotional predictability once existed. Another powerful aspect of silence is that it protects your inner world. Words spoken in pain often reveal too much: your fears, your attachments, your need for validation. Silence keeps those private. It allows you to process internally without external interference or pressure. When you stay quiet, you are not giving away access to your emotional state. This preserves dignity and prevents the situation from escalating into something larger than it needs to be. Silence acts as a boundary when words would only blur lines. Silence also shifts responsibility. When you stop explaining or defending yourself, the focus moves away from your emotions and toward the behavior that caused the hurt. The other person is left to sit with their actions without being distracted by your reaction. In many cases, this is when reflection happens, not because you demanded it, but because silence forces awareness. When there is no immediate emotional response, people are more likely to confront their own role in the situation. There is also clarity that comes from silence. By stepping back, you gain perspective. You observe patterns instead of isolated moments. You notice whether the hurt was a one-time mistake or part of a repeated behavior. Silence gives you time to decide what you are willing to tolerate and what requires a boundary. Without this pause, you may react to the symptom rather than the pattern, addressing the surface issue while ignoring the deeper problem. Strategic silence does not mean permanent silence. It means choosing the right moment to speak, if speaking is necessary at all. When words finally come after silence, they carry more weight. They are no longer emotional reactions, but deliberate statements. Calm, measured words spoken after silence are harder to dismiss and easier to respect. Silence sharpens communication by removing excess emotion and leaving only intention. When someone hurts you, the mind immediately looks for resolution. It wants answers, explanations, apologies, or reassurance that what happened did not mean what it felt like it meant. This urge is often labeled as a need for closure, but in reality, it is a need for emotional relief. Chasing closure places your emotional stability in someone else's hands because it assumes that peace can only come after they say the right words or acknowledge your pain in the way you expect. The moment you seek closure from the person who caused the hurt, you quietly give them authority over how and when you heal. Closure seeking often disguises itself as maturity or communication, but it can easily turn into emotional dependence. You replay conversations, draft messages in your head, and imagine scenarios where they finally understand you. In doing so, you remain mentally tied to the source of pain. Instead of moving forward, your energy stays anchored to the past interaction. This gives the other person continued psychological presence in your life, even if they are physically absent or emotionally unavailable. Control is lost, not because you care, but because your peace becomes conditional. Another hidden cost of chasing closure is that it weakens boundaries. When you ask someone to explain themselves after they have hurt you, you imply that their perspective holds the key to your emotional balance. You may tolerate dismissiveness, defensiveness, or half-hearted apologies just to feel some sense of resolution. Over time, this teaches people that they do not need to treat you carefully because you will always come back seeking understanding rather than enforcing distance or consequences. Closure seeking can unintentionally reward emotional inconsistency. Chasing closure also assumes that people are always self-aware, honest, or emotionally capable of giving you what you need. This assumption often leads to disappointment. Some people cannot acknowledge harm without feeling threatened, and others simply do not value the impact of their actions. When closure does not arrive, the pain deepens, not because of the original hurt, but because expectations were placed on someone who could not meet them. This cycle reinforces the false belief that healing must be externally granted. True control begins when you redefine closure as an internal process rather than an external event. Closure does not require agreement, apology, or explanation. It requires acceptance of reality as it is, not as you hoped it would be. When you stop chasing answers, you reclaim your emotional autonomy. You decide that understanding every detail is less important than protecting your peace. This shift is not denial. It is discernment. Letting go of the need for closure also restores self-respect. You stop asking questions that leave you vulnerable to further hurt. You stop negotiating your worth through conversations that reopen wounds. Instead, you focus on what the situation revealed rather than what it failed to resolve. What people do, especially when it hurts, often provides more clarity than anything they could say afterward. When you stop chasing closure, your attention moves inward. You begin asking different questions, not about their intentions, but about your boundaries, your needs, and your standards. This internal focus strengthens emotional independence. Healing becomes something you participate in actively rather than wait for passively. Control returns not through confrontation, but through detachment, where your peace no longer depends on someone else's willingness to understand you. A calm response carries a quiet authority that emotional reactions never achieve. When you remain composed after being hurt, you signal that your inner stability is not easily disrupted. This does not mean the pain was insignificant. It means you are not allowing pain to dictate your behavior. Calmness communicates strength without aggression and confidence without arrogance. People instinctively recognize this kind of emotional control because it is rare. In situations where heightened emotion is expected, composure stands out and reshapes how you are perceived. Respect is often less about what you say and more about how you say it. A calm tone, steady pacing, and controlled language suggest self-awareness and emotional maturity. When others see that you can regulate yourself under pressure, they assume you can regulate other aspects of your life as well. This perception builds credibility. A calm response also limits misinterpretation. Emotional speech tends to exaggerate, accuse, or defend, creating room for conflict. Calm speech narrows the message, making it harder to twist or dismiss. It removes unnecessary noise and leaves only intention. Another reason calm responses command respect is that they reduce defensiveness in others. When someone feels attacked, their instinct is to protect themselves rather than listen. Emotional reactions often trigger this defense, turning conversations into power struggles. A calm response does the opposite. It lowers the emotional temperature of the interaction, making space for accountability and reflection. Even if the other person does not immediately admit fault, they are more likely to consider your words when they are not delivered with intensity or blame. Calmness also demonstrates emotional boundaries. You are showing that while you are aware of the hurt, you are not consumed by it. This distinction matters. It tells others that access to your emotions is not automatic or uncontrolled. Over time, people adjust their behavior around those who respond calmly because they sense that emotional manipulation, provocation, or chaos will not work. Calm individuals become psychologically solid reference points in relationships, and stability naturally attracts respect. There is also self-respect embedded in calm responses. When you speak without emotional urgency, you affirm that your feelings are valid without needing external validation. You do not over-explain or justify yourself. You state what needs to be said and allow it to stand. This restraint suggests that you trust your own judgment. People often respect those who appear internally anchored because they do not seem desperate for agreement or approval. Calm responses protect your long-term influence. Emotional reactions may feel satisfying in the moment, but they often weaken your position over time. Calm communication, even in difficult moments, builds a reputation for reliability and fairness. People remember how you made them feel during conflict, not just the outcome. When you remain composed, you are remembered as thoughtful rather than reactive, grounded rather than volatile. Choosing calmness does not mean tolerating disrespect or suppressing truth. It means delivering truth without emotional excess. Calm responses allow you to assert boundaries clearly while maintaining control of the interaction. This balance between firmness and composure is what makes calmness powerful. It communicates that you are aware, intentional, and unwilling to be pulled into emotional turbulence, and that kind of presence naturally commands respect.